She won't be your pawn anymore. How human rebels shatter immortal alien empires in an epic uprising. The sound of Ardin's boots echoed through the cold, metallic corridors of the galactic prison, each step carrying him closer to an uncertain future. He had never imagined that a petty crime, a small act of defiance against the bureaucracy of the empire, would lead to a fate more tangled than the webs of power that stretched across the stars. Ardin had always lived by his own rules, a wanderer, a thief, a dreamer, but now he found himself at the mercy of forces far beyond his comprehension. Thrown into a cell meant for those who didn't belong, Ardin had no idea that his life was about to change forever. The door to his cell clanged open with a cold finality, and before him stood a woman, Hyra, the daughter of one of the most powerful military families in the galaxy. She was beautiful, poised, and yet there was an emptiness in her eyes, an isolation that seemed to radiate from her every move. She wasn't here for any ordinary reason, though. She was here for him. Ardin, you are hereby bound by the will of the High Council of the Dominion, she announced, her voice firm but not unkind. You are to be wed to me. This is no request, but a decree. Ardin's heart pounded, disbelief mixing with the cold realization that his life was no longer his own. A marriage, he scoffed, trying to hold on to some semblance of his rebellious self. For what? A bit of paperwork? What's this really about? Hyra's gaze never wavered. This is not just a marriage. It's a political union. My family needs you. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, the weight of her words sinking in. Ardin wasn't sure if it was the fact that he was being used or the fact that he was actually going along with it that stunned him more. You're serious, he muttered, staring at her with a mix of confusion and disbelief. You want me to marry you to, what, play some game of yours? She nodded once, but there was a flicker of something more in her eyes. It was not just obligation that brought her here. It was something else, something far deeper. Hyra had been raised in the shadow of her family's immense power, a military dynasty with ambitions that spanned galaxies. She was not the typical high-born heiress, though. She had been raised not only to lead, but to wield something more dangerous: psychic abilities, honed and controlled by her family for one purpose: to control others. These abilities, which might have been a gift for someone else, had been a curse for her, a tool used by her family, a weapon that she herself did not understand. And so, she stood before Ardin, her life already decided, her future a set path. The psychic gifts she had were the inheritance of her bloodline, yet they were not her own. Every telepathic whisper, every mind-bending skill had been trained into her since childhood, shaping her into a tool, a living weapon. In her family's eyes, she was a prize to be married off, an heir who had to marry for political advantage, to solidify their grip over the stars. Ardin's world, on the other hand, had been far simpler. He was a wanderer, a rogue, someone who had slipped through the cracks of society to avoid the watchful eyes of power. And now, here he was, in chains, being led to an unknown fate. I don't even know you, Ardin said, breaking the silence. Why me? You are an outsider, Hera said, her tone steady. A nobody, but nobody can be useful in ways the powerful can't see. My family believes you will be the perfect pawn in their plans. A man without ties to anyone, without allegiances. Ardin shook his head, his fingers brushing against the cold walls of his cell, as if testing the boundaries of his new prison. A pawn? Great. I guess I should be flattered. His sarcastic words hung in the air, but Hyra didn't flinch. I've been a pawn all my life, she said quietly, her voice carrying a bitterness that made Ardin pause. Being forced into a marriage is nothing compared to what I've already lost. But I will not lose myself completely. Not to my family, and certainly not to you. Ardin met her gaze for a long moment, feeling the weight of her words settle into the quiet of the prison. He saw something in her eyes, a fire, a longing for something more than what she had been handed. And in that moment he understood. They were both trapped, caught in a web of power and expectations far greater than either of them. but he was not one to bow easily. "All right then," Ardin said, standing a little taller, his defiance returning. "If I'm going to be a pawn, I'll at least make sure I don't play by your rules. We'll see who controls who." Despite their differences, Hyra and Ardin were bound together by a shared fate. Ardin's cynicism and Hyra's burdened sense of duty made for a volatile mix. Yet in the depths of their forced union, something began to shift. They were both caught in a game of galactic proportions, but neither of them knew the rules. What started as mutual suspicion slowly transformed into something more complicated, a reluctant partnership, a shared understanding of power's seductive grip and its harsh consequences. As they prepared to leave the prison, Hyra turned to Ardin, her expression unreadable. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into," she said, her voice calm but tinged with something more. Ardin chuckled. "Trust me, I've gotten worse." The door to their future was wide open, and neither of them had any idea just how far the road ahead would take them. For in the shadows of the galaxy, there were secrets waiting to be uncovered, and powers lurking, ready to challenge everything they thought they knew about loyalty, freedom, and fate. And so, with one final look, they walked into the unknown together. The galaxy was not a simple place. It was a web of intrigues, conspiracies, and ancient powers that stretched far beyond the reaches of any one civilization. Ardin quickly learned that his marriage to Hyra was not just about political ties, it was about something much deeper, something hidden in the vastness of the stars. As they traveled together, his understanding of the universe grew, but so did his realization that they were both part of something far more dangerous than either of them had expected. Hyra sat across from Ardin in the sleek starship, her expression distant, staring out of the window into the star-filled void. She hadn't spoken much since their escape from the prison, but Ardin noticed the way her fingers occasionally twitched, as if she were testing the limits of her psychic abilities. She wasn't the passive, obedient daughter of a military dynasty that he had first assumed. No, there was something more, something dangerous lurking beneath the surface of her composed exterior. "I need to show you something," Hyra said suddenly, her voice low, as though she were deciding whether or not to reveal a long-held secret. Ardin raised an eyebrow. "Show me? What, like a new trick with your mind?" Hyra didn't smile. Instead, she stood in motion for him to follow. They entered a small chamber at the back of the ship, one that was far more isolated than the rest of the ship's gleaming corridors. There in the dim light, she placed her hand on the console in front of her and activated a holographic display. It was a star map. "What's this?" Ardin asked, stepping closer to get a better view. The map was filled with blinking lights, lines stretching between stars, and symbols he couldn't quite decipher. It was a map of the galaxy, but there was something unsettling about it. The lines were not random. They connected certain stars, forming an intricate web. "Do you see it?" Hyra's voice was tinged with a mixture of awe and fear. Ardin frowned. "I see stars. A few lines. What does it mean?" She hesitated before speaking again, as though gathering the strength to utter the words that would change everything. "This is the legacy of my family," she said quietly. "And it's my legacy too." Hyra turned to him, and for the first time Ardin saw the weight of her truth in her eyes. "I am the heir to a powerful extraterrestrial military dynasty, a bloodline that has existed for millennia. My family controls more than just weapons. They control the fabric of the galaxy itself." Ardin blinked, processing what she had just revealed. "Wait a second. Your family, you're telling me that you're not just some noble brat? You're part of some ancient empire? And you never thought to mention that earlier?" Hyra's lips curled slightly. "I was never supposed to know. I wasn't supposed to learn about my heritage, at least not until I was ready to take control of it. But as you can see," she gestured toward the map, "the galaxy is not just a random collection of stars. These lines are pathways, routes that my family's dynasty has carved out for centuries. They've been expanding their empire, one world at a time." Ardin was silent for a moment, digesting the enormity of what she had just shared. A powerful alien empire, controlling galaxies, manipulating the flow of civilizations across time and space. It sounded like something straight out of a science fiction novel. But Hyra's voice was so calm, so unyielding, that he knew she wasn't lying. So what does this have to do with you? He asked, his voice low. You're the heir to this empire? Hyra nodded, her eyes narrowing. Yes, but it's not just that. My family wants me to take my place as the ruler of this empire. But the truth is, I don't want it. I never did. Ardin studied her face, trying to understand what she was really saying. Why not? You have power. You have control over all this. He gestured vaguely at the star map. Why throw it all away? It's not that simple. Hyra's voice broke with emotion for the first time, and Ardin realized just how much this decision weighed on her. I've been trained since I was a child to accept this fate, but now I understand the cost. The Empire doesn't just conquer worlds. It destroys them. It forces civilizations into submission. And I'm supposed to lead that. The air between them was thick with tension as Ardin absorbed her words. So, you're telling me that you've been forced into this from the start? Yes, Hyra replied, her voice steady once more. But now I have a choice, and I'll make it. Ardin couldn't help but shake his head. What exactly are you planning to do? Turn your back on your family? Your empire? Hyra's expression darkened. I'll destroy it, if necessary. As their journey continued, Ardin and Hyra grew closer, each conversation peeling back another layer of their past, revealing the raw, unspoken truths they had been running from. Hyra's decision to reject her family's power was not one she made lightly. It would mean betraying her bloodline, condemning herself to be hunted by those she once called family. But there was no turning back. Her realization that her family's power was based on oppression, on the subjugation of entire worlds, had fueled her determination to forge her own path. Still, Ardin could see the toll it was taking on her. She was caught between two worlds, one of unimaginable power and the other of uncertain freedom, and the battle within her was evident in every moment. She would have to face the consequences of her choices, not only from her family but from the galaxy itself. After all, empires rarely fall without bloodshed. Do you regret it? Ardin asked one night, as they sat together on the observation deck, staring at the stars. Hyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she simply watched the stars twinkling in the vast expanse. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but resolute. No, because the only thing worse than regret is living a life that isn't truly yours. Ardin understood, though he couldn't help but wonder what kind of man he had become in all of this. He was no hero. He was not chosen. He had simply found himself in the right place at the right time, or maybe the wrong place at the wrong time. But whatever it was, he could no longer deny that his fate was tied to Hyra's in ways that neither of them had expected. As they continued their journey into the heart of the galaxy, they would face challenges, betrayal, and unimaginable truths. But one thing was certain. Hyra was no longer just the daughter of a powerful military family. She was a force in her own right, and she would stop at nothing to rewrite the stars that had been laid out for her. And Ardin, for better or worse, would be by her side when it all came crashing down. The deeper Ardin and Hyra ventured into the galaxy, the clearer it became. The universe was a place where allegiances shifted like sand, and power was only as stable as the hand that wielded it. The further they traveled, the more Ardin realized that their journey was about to pull them into something far greater and far more dangerous than either of them had imagined. They were no longer simply running from a forced marriage or a family's expectation. They were becoming pawns in a galactic game that spanned eons. Their first real hint of this came when they were summoned to meet a mysterious faction, one that had secretly allied with Hyra's family for centuries. The meeting took place on a cold, barren planet, far from the prying eyes of the imperial capital. The city they arrived in was a sprawling fortress, half-finished and seemingly abandoned, its towering structures covered in ice and mist. Ardin could feel the tension in the air the moment they stepped off the ship. Something was off, something that gnawed at the back of his mind. Hyra, as calm and composed as ever, didn't seem fazed by the strange setting, but Ardin could tell she was on edge. She was always on edge these days. Her family's expectations loomed over her like a shadow, and the knowledge of her destiny was a weight she could barely bear. "We don't have much time," Hyra said as they approached the entrance to the fortress. "This faction, the Valthar, they've been watching us for years. They're not as loyal to my family as they'd like you to believe. Ardin raised an eyebrow. So they're more like opportunists? What's their game? Hyra's eyes hardened. Exactly. And I'm their next target. They know I'm the heir to the dynasty, and they want to control me. Use me to further their own interests. Ardin couldn't help but chuckle darkly. So the galaxy's full of people who want to use you as a puppet? Sounds like a real good time. It's not just me, Hyra replied, her tone flat. They'll use anyone, even you if they think they can. As they entered the fortress, they were greeted by the faction's leader, a tall, gaunt figure draped in flowing black robes that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. His eyes were dark and calculating, betraying little emotion. You must be the gifted, Hyra, he said with a smirk, his voice dripping with condescension. I'm sure your family would be very proud to see you here, in the company of those who know how to wield power properly. Hyra stood straight, her gaze unwavering. I'm not here to play games with you. I've come to make one thing clear. I will not be a pawn in your plot. The leader, whose name was Rael, smiled coldly. Oh, I think you will, whether you choose to or not. The tension in the room thickened. Ardin could see the glint of something dangerous in Rael's eyes. This wasn't going to be a peaceful negotiation. It was a game of cat and mouse, and they were the prey. Rael stepped forward, his fingers brushing against the surface of a holographic display. The map that appeared before them was a familiar one, the same one Hyra had shown Ardin earlier. But now there were new symbols added to it, dots that glowed ominously in areas that Hyra's family had long considered secure. Valthar had infiltrated parts of her empire, and they were preparing to make their move. You see, Hyra, Rael said, his voice like velvet over steel, we're not interested in what your family offers. We want what you can offer. And what you can offer is more power than your family could ever dream of. Ardin clenched his fists at his sides. And if she doesn't want to play by your rules? Rael's smile only widened. Then she's a liability. And so are you. Before Ardin could respond, a sudden wave of cold swept over the room. The temperature dropped sharply and the lights flickered. Hyra's eyes flashed with psychic energy as she reacted instinctively, her powers surging through the room in a wave of invisible force. Enough, she commanded, her voice steady but commanding. The cold subsided and the lights returned to normal. You will not threaten me. Rael chuckled softly, unfazed by the display. Oh, I'm not threatening you. I'm offering you a choice. You can join us, Hyra, or you can leave here as a prisoner. Your family will fall, one way or another. It's only a matter of time. But with us, you can rise. You'll be more than just an heir. You'll be the ruler of the galaxy. Hyra's jaw tightened, her gaze unwavering. I've made my choice. I'm not your tool. Ardin could see the hesitation in Rael's eyes, the flicker of doubt. He wasn't used to being defied, not by someone like Hera, but Hyra's refusal to be controlled, her unwillingness to bow to the power of the Valthar, was both her greatest strength and her greatest weakness. Rael took a step back, his expression darkening. Very well. But remember this, Hyra. You're not in control anymore. You think you can defy fate, but fate always has a way of finding its way back to you. As they left the fortress, Hyra was silent, her expression distant as the weight of the conversation hung heavily between them. Ardin couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The Valthar were powerful, and their influence stretched far beyond what they had seen. The galaxy was a far more dangerous place than he had ever imagined, and Hyra's family's grip on it was slipping. I don't trust them, Ardin said, breaking the silence. Hyra glanced at him, her eyes tired but resolute. You're not supposed to trust them, and neither am I. But I don't have much of a choice. The Valthar are playing a game I can't afford to lose. Ardin shook his head. Seems like they're all playing a game, and you're just one more piece on the board. Hyra's gaze turned cold, her lips curling into a faint, bitter smile. Maybe, but I'm the one who decides when the game ends. As they journeyed on, the galaxy grew more dangerous, the factions more vicious, and the stakes higher than ever. Hyra's family was not the only force they had to contend with. There were others lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And Ardin knew that, sooner or later, they would be forced to face the full weight of the galaxy's power. But one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, Hera would never be just a pawn again. She would fight, no matter the cost. And Ardin, for all his cynicism and reluctance, would stand by her side. The stars outside the starship's windows were a silent witness to the chaos unfolding within. The cold expanse of space seemed vast and infinite, but for Ardin and Hera, it had never felt so suffocating. Their journey, which had once seemed like an escape, now felt like a descent into the very heart of the storm. They were running out of options, and their enemies were closing in. The Valthar were just one faction among many, and the galaxy was quickly revealing that it was a far more dangerous place than either of them had realized. After their meeting with Rael, Hera had become more distant, her mind racing with plans and counterplans, her psychic abilities stretched thin as she tried to maintain control over her situation. Ardin, for his part, kept his distance, but was keenly aware that their lives had been irrevocably altered. No matter how much he tried to keep his distance from the conflict, the truth was inescapable. Hera's fate, and his own, was now tied to the galaxy's power struggles. "I need you to help me," Hera's voice broke through his thoughts one evening as they sat in the quiet of the ship's mess hall. Her words weren't a request, they were a command, but not one born of arrogance. There was something in her tone, something raw, that made Ardin stop. He met her eyes, finding them not the cold, determined eyes of the woman who had walked into his life with all the weight of her family's power, but a woman who had been broken and remade by that very power. "Help you with what?" "I've been having visions," Hera said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Visions of the future, of the galaxy's collapse. They're becoming more frequent, more vivid. I don't know what they mean, but they feel real. Like they're happening right now." Ardin raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued despite himself. "You mean psychic visions? Is this some kind of new trick? Or are we talking about something more prophetic?" Hera hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table between them. "They're not just visions. They're warnings. The galaxy is heading toward a collapse, Ardin. A war unlike anything we've seen before, and I don't know if I can stop it, or if I even should." Her words hung in the air like an unspoken promise. The tension between them thickened, and for the first time Ardin saw the true weight of Hera's responsibility, not just as the heir to a powerful military dynasty, but as someone who could see the destruction that was coming and felt the burden of having to decide whether or not she should act to prevent it. "How are you supposed to stop something like that?" Ardin asked quietly, trying to grasp the magnitude of her words. "What if it's inevitable?" "I don't know," Hera replied, her voice cracking. "But I have to try. I have to know if I can. The galaxy, it's dying, Ardin, and I'm supposed to be the one who decides if it lives or dies. If my family has its way, they'll let the galaxy burn. But I'm not sure I can fight them alone." There was a vulnerability in her that Ardin had never seen before, a crack in the facade of the powerful heir she had always been. For all the psychic powers, all the military strength at her disposal, Hera was still just one person, struggling to carry the weight of a galaxy on her shoulders. Ardin exhaled sharply, his mind racing. "So, what? You're telling me that you can see the future? And that the galaxy's about to be torn apart?" Hera nodded slowly. "Not exactly the future. It's more like glimpses, fragments. And sometimes it feels like I'm seeing everything, like I can't escape it. But it's not just visions. There's something out there, something ancient, that's been lying dormant. And my family, they've been protecting it, but now they're using it for their own gain. It's called the Void Gate." Ardin felt a chill run down his spine at the mention of the Void Gate. The rumors had been whispers at best, stories passed down by those who didn't know the full truth. But he knew enough to understand that the Void Gate was no ordinary relic. "The Void Gate," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "What is it? A weapon? A portal?" "It's a gateway," Hera explained, her voice full of dread. "A gateway to something far older than any of us. It's the reason why my family's empire has lasted so long. They've controlled the Void Gate for centuries, using it to access ancient powers, powers that shouldn't exist. But now they've made a deal with something even older, something that wants to use the Void Gate to bring about the galaxy's destruction. Ardin's thoughts raced as he tried to make sense of what Hira had just told him. And your family, your father, what are they doing with this power? What do they want with it? They want control, Hira said, her tone hardening again. My family has always wanted to control the stars. They think the Void Gate will give them the ultimate power, the power to conquer and reshape the galaxy. But what they don't know, what they don't understand, is that this power comes with a price, and that price is the galaxy's very existence. Ardin leaned forward, his gaze steady. So, if we stop them from using the Void Gate, we stop this war, and maybe we save the galaxy. Is that it? Hira nodded, her eyes dark with the weight of her realization. It's not that simple. The Void Gate is buried deep, hidden in a place only my family knows how to access. And getting there won't be easy. But if we don't act, everything will burn. As their ship continued toward the coordinates Hira had revealed to him, the tension between them grew, thickening with every passing moment. They were headed into the unknown, not just in terms of location, but in terms of the forces they were about to face. The Void Gate, ancient and powerful, was more than just a relic. It was a doorway to something that could either save or destroy the galaxy. Ardin glanced at Hira, who sat in the cockpit, her hands lightly touching the control panel, as if she were mentally preparing for what lay ahead. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of person he had become. He had always been a loner, a rogue, someone who avoided responsibility at all costs. But now, as he stood beside Hira, there was no escaping the fact that his fate, and the fate of everyone they knew, was tied to her decision. You know, we could just fly away, Ardin said with a smirk, trying to lighten the mood, though he knew it was a futile attempt. I'm sure we could find a nice quiet planet somewhere and just live out our lives in peace. Hira's eyes flicked to him, and she gave a small, rueful smile. Peace? In a galaxy like this? He shrugged. Well, we could try, but I suppose saving the galaxy comes with its own perks, right? She didn't smile back, but there was something in her gaze, something that told Ardin she wasn't in this for the galaxy. She was in it for herself, for her own survival. And maybe, just maybe, for a chance to rewrite the future that had been set in motion the day she was born. As the ship raced toward its destination, the stars outside seemed to pulse with a strange, rhythmic energy, as if the galaxy itself were holding its breath. For what was to come would change everything. And the closer they got to the Void Gate, the more certain Ardin became of one thing. There was no going back. The journey to the coordinates Hira had uncovered was long and tense. The stars outside their starship were like pinpricks in a vast empty void, each one a cold reminder of how little they truly understood the universe. For Ardin, the silence of space felt suffocating, each passing day spent in the company of Hira, who seemed more distant than ever, made him feel like he was orbiting her, never truly touching the ground. He couldn't help but think that they were heading into a place where no one came back unchanged, if they came back at all. Hira, too, seemed lost in her own thoughts. Her psychic powers had been growing stronger, the visions more frequent and more intense. Ardin noticed that sometimes she'd stand in the control room, her eyes glazed over, as though she were seeing something far beyond the ship, beyond even the stars themselves. He knew better than to ask about it, though. The more he saw, the less he understood, and the less he wanted to. Finally, they arrived. The planet they landed on was an ancient world, long abandoned by most civilizations. Its surface was a barren wasteland of dust and stone, the remnants of an age that had long since passed. There were no cities here, no signs of life, only the occasional ancient ruin that dotted the landscape. It was the perfect hiding place for something as dangerous as the Void Gate. Hira stood at the airlock, looking out at the desolate terrain. This is it, she said quietly, her voice tinged with apprehension. The Void Gate is buried beneath the surface here, hidden in the ruins of an old temple. Only my family knows the exact location, and they'll do everything they can to keep us from reaching it. Ardin, who had been quietly checking his gear, glanced up, So, we're not exactly here for a nice sightseeing tour, huh? Hyra's eyes flicked to him, but her expression remained unreadable. No, we're here to stop my family from destroying everything. The Void Gate is more than just a relic. It's a weapon. And if they use it, they'll unlock a power far beyond anything they can control. There was a weight in her words, a gravity that made Ardin feel the full force of their mission. They were no longer simply running from something, they were walking straight into the heart of a war that could tear the galaxy apart. All right then, he said, clapping his hands together as he stood up. Let's get this over with. The journey to the temple was treacherous, the landscape harsh and unforgiving. The air was thin, and the terrain was constantly shifting, as if the planet itself was rejecting their presence. But they pressed on, moving through the ruins with careful precision, avoiding traps and obstacles set by the ancient civilization that had once called this place home. As they neared the entrance to the temple, Hyra stopped, her hand raised in a silent command. She closed her eyes for a moment, her psychic abilities reaching out like tendrils into the ruins, searching for any sign of danger. Ardin stood next to her, his hand resting on the hilt of his blaster, ever watchful. I can feel them, she whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. They're close. Ardin frowned. Who? Valthar? Hyra nodded, her eyes still closed. They're already here. My family's spies. They've been watching me. Watching us. Before Ardin could respond, a sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet. The force of it sent them both tumbling to the ground, the sound deafening as debris rained down around them. Ardin scrambled to his feet, his heart racing as he looked around for Hyra. She was already up, her psychic powers deflecting the falling rubble with a force that sent shivers down his spine. Her eyes blazed with anger, her every movement an expression of the power she had inherited. They're not just watching us, she said, her voice colder than he had ever heard it. They've been waiting for us. Before Ardin could ask what she meant, the ground beneath them gave way, and they both fell into a hidden chamber deep beneath the temple. The walls were lined with strange symbols, glowing faintly with an eerie, otherworldly light. In the center of the room, surrounded by ancient technology, stood a massive stone arch, an altar of sorts, its surface covered in a strange, pulsating energy. The Void Gate, Hyra breathed, stepping forward as though drawn by an unseen force. Her hand reached out to touch the stone, her fingers brushing against the ancient markings. This is it. This is the source of everything. Ardin stood frozen, his eyes wide as he took in the sight before him. The Void Gate was no mere relic. It was alive, pulsing with an energy that made his skin crawl. The very air around them seemed to hum with power, and the sense of danger was palpable. He knew they were running out of time. We need to destroy it, Hyra said, her voice full of determination. If we don't, my family will use it to conquer the galaxy. The Valthar will follow, and the universe will fall into chaos. Just as Hyra reached for the Void Gate, the chamber shook violently. The walls cracked and the ground split open beneath them. Ardin grabbed her arm, pulling her back as the entire temple began to collapse around them. The air was thick with dust and debris, and the sound of stone breaking apart filled the air like thunder. We need to move, Ardin shouted over the chaos, pulling Hyra away from the Void Gate. Now! But it was too late. The Valthar were already there. Rael appeared in the doorway, flanked by his soldiers, their weapons raised. His cold smile was the last thing Ardin saw before the world went black. When Ardin regained consciousness, he was no longer in the chamber beneath the temple. He was in a dark, damp cell, the cold stone walls pressing in on him. His head throbbed with pain, and his limbs felt heavy, as though they had been drugged. His first instinct was to move, but his body refused to cooperate. He strained to listen, his ears ringing, but all he could hear was the distant hum of machinery. And then there was a familiar voice, though it sounded distant and broken. Ardin! Ardin! Wake up! Hyra. He forced his eyes open, and there she was, standing at the bars of the cell, her face pale but determined. Her psychic powers were flickering erratically, and Ardin knew that she was just as exhausted as he was. Hyra! What happened? He groaned, struggling to sit up. They captured us, she said, her voice strained. They're taking us to the capital. My family. They know we tried to destroy the Void Gate. Ardin swore under his breath. They're not just going to let us go, are they? Hyra's gaze hardened. No, they're going to make sure we never leave. But I have a plan. Ardin raised an eyebrow. A plan? In here? Hyra nodded, her expression resolute. We still have a chance, but it's going to take everything we've got. The stakes had never been higher. They were trapped, surrounded by enemies on all sides. In the Void Gate, this strange, ancient force was still within reach, still a threat to the galaxy. As Ardin and Hyra exchanged glances in the dim light of their prison, it became clear. This was only the beginning. The real battle was about to begin, and the galaxy's fate would be decided by the choices they made next. The prison cell was cold, too cold for comfort, the stone walls slick with moisture, the air heavy with the scent of decay. Ardin had lost track of time, and every minute spent in this dark place only made the situation seem worse. His head ached from the beating, his body sore from whatever drugs they'd injected into him to keep him compliant. But more than that, his mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. They were imprisoned in the heart of enemy territory, the capital of the very empire they sought to destroy, and their chances of escape seemed to grow slimmer by the hour. Hyra was pacing the length of their cell, her expression fierce but conflicted. Her psychic powers were fluctuating, too unstable to be fully controlled in her current condition. She wasn't sure if it was the environment, the proximity to the Void Gate's energy, or her own emotional turmoil, but her powers were barely holding together. Every few minutes her eyes would flicker with psychic energy, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. You're sure this plan will work? Ardin asked, leaning against the wall, his arms folded across his chest. He had to ask, even though he didn't want to. They were running out of options. Hyra stopped her pacing and turned to him, her gaze sharp, almost predatory. It has to. We don't have a choice. She clenched her fists, her psychic energy crackling around her fingertips. The Valthar may think they've won, but they don't know what I'm capable of. I won't let them control me. Ardin knew she meant it. He had seen her fight for control over her powers time and time again. But this was different. The Valthar had pushed them into a corner, and now it was a fight for survival. But even with Hyra's abilities, there were far too many of them. Too many forces working against them. If they didn't escape soon, it would be too late. Valthar had the Void Gate. They were moving closer to unleashing whatever dark power it held. And Hyra's family, led by her own father, would stop at nothing to use it to cement their rule across the galaxy. The thing that worries me, Ardin said, breaking the silence, is that they already know you're not with them. I've seen the way your father looks at you. He'll want to make an example of you. He'll want to make sure you can't stop him. Hyra's jaw tightened at the mention of her father. It was clear that the wounds between them were still raw, and Ardin couldn't blame her for feeling that way. Her family had used her, controlled her, and now she was the one who had to make the decision. Stay loyal to blood or fight for something greater. I've already made my choice, she said softly. He's not my family anymore. Ardin nodded, a faint but determined smile crossing his face. Good, because we're going to need all the strength you've got. The next day they were dragged before their captors. Valthar's stronghold was an imposing structure, towering above them like some ancient fortress. The walls were smooth, devoid of ornamentation, as though the building itself were a reminder that power did not need decoration. The air here was thick with the scent of power, a stifling reminder of the stakes they were facing. Rael stood before them, his cold smile never fading. The Valthar leader had been waiting for this moment, the moment when they could finally break Hyra and Ardin, when they could force them to bend to their will. But there was something in Hyra's eyes that told him he would not get what he wanted so easily. You've made a mistake, Rael said, his voice smooth, like a silk thread pulling at the very fabric of their lives. You thought you could defy the will of the stars. You thought you could escape your fate. But fate, my dear, always catches up with you. Hyra stared at him, her hands twitching with power. But she didn't speak. Her silence spoke volumes. She was no longer a frightened pawn. She was a force unto herself. Rael seemed to enjoy the silence for a moment, allowing it to stretch between them. Then he turned to Ardin, his smile shifting into something more malicious. "And you, Ardin," Rael purred. "I must admit, I'm curious about you. A rogue, a rebel, a man without ties to anyone. Tell me, do you think you're capable of changing anything? Do you believe that this galaxy can be saved?" Ardin stepped forward, matching Rael's gaze. "I believe in people, and I believe that if you push them far enough, they'll fight back. It doesn't matter how many of you there are. We're not going down without a fight." Rael laughed, the sound echoing through the room like the crackle of burning wood. "How quaint. You're an idealist, Ardin, and that will be your undoing. The galaxy doesn't need hope. It needs order." As Rael turned his attention back to Hyra, Ardin saw the flicker of movement in her eyes. The psychic energy was there. She was preparing for something. She wasn't just going to sit by and let this happen. "You think you've won, Rael," Hyra said suddenly, her voice low and dangerous. "But you haven't. You're not in control anymore." Before anyone could react, Hera unleashed a burst of psychic energy that sent Rael and his guards flying across the room. The force of the blast shattered the walls, the room vibrating with the raw power of her abilities. For a moment, Ardin could barely process what was happening. He'd seen her use her powers before, but this was different. This was raw, untamed energy, a force of nature unleashed. "Now's our chance," Hyra shouted, grabbing Ardin's arm. They dashed toward the door as alarms began to blare, red lights flashing across the room. The fight wasn't over yet. They still had to make it out. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Ardin felt a spark of hope. Hyra had tapped into her full power, and now it was up to them to escape and stop Valthar before they could unleash the Void Gate. The halls of the stronghold were chaotic. The Valthar soldiers scrambled to regain control, but Hyra's psychic powers kept them at bay, knocking down anyone who came too close. Ardin moved with purpose, his instincts kicking in as he led them toward the nearest escape route. He could feel the walls closing in, could sense the Valthar closing in on them, but for the first time he wasn't afraid. They reached a small docking bay where a single ship awaited them. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The Valthar were still regrouping, and they had one shot at getting out. "Get in!" Ardin shouted, pushing Hyra into the cockpit. He fired up the engines as the Valthar soldiers rounded the corner. The ship lurched into the air, the walls of the stronghold shaking with the violence of the escape. As the ship burst through the atmosphere, leaving the stronghold behind, Ardin let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. They were alive. They had escaped, but the battle was far from over. "Where do we go now?" Ardin asked, glancing over at Hyra. Hyra's expression was resolute. "To the heart of the Empire, to the Void Gate. We finish this." The galaxy was at war. The Valthar would stop at nothing to control the power of the Void Gate, and Hyra's family would do whatever it took to maintain their control. Ardin and Hyra were the only ones who could stop them, but as they sped toward the heart of the Empire, Ardin couldn't help but wonder if the galaxy would survive the storm they were about to unleash. They had crossed a line now, and there was no turning back. The stars outside the ship's windows no longer seemed like distant pinpricks of light in the vast expanse of space. They had become markers, signposts on the path to something greater, more dangerous. Ardin sat in the cockpit, watching the vast emptiness of the galaxy unfold before him, his hands gripping the controls as the ship sped through the void. The hum of the engines was the only sound in the cockpit, a steady rhythm that matched the rapid beating of his heart. Beside him, Hyra was silent, her eyes distant, her mind elsewhere. She had been like this since their escape, focused, driven, but burdened by the weight of everything they were about to face. There was no turning back now. They had entered the heart of enemy territory, the place where her family's power was the strongest. The Void Gate was within their reach, but so were the forces that would stop at nothing to use it for their own gain. "How much farther?" Ardin asked, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a sense of urgency that had been building ever since they left the Valthar stronghold. "Not far," Hyra replied, her voice tight. She glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable. "Once we reach the capital, there won't be any more chances. will be facing my father and his entire fleet. Ardin nodded. He had known this was coming. Hyra's family, her father, had always been a powerful force in the galaxy, but now they were more than just a family. They were a symbol of the oppressive rule that had dominated the stars for centuries, and Hyra, despite everything, was still a part of it. She had been forced into this role, this legacy, but now she had a chance to change everything. "What's your plan once we get there?" Ardin asked, his gaze shifting to the dark expanse ahead of them. Hyra's lips tightened. "We destroy the Void Gate. My family wants to use it, but it's not just a weapon. It's a key to something far worse than anyone can imagine. If we don't stop them, everything will be lost. The galaxy will fall into a darkness it can't escape from." Ardin swallowed, the gravity of her words sinking in. The Void Gate wasn't just a relic of an ancient civilization. It was a weapon, a gateway to unimaginable power. Hyra had already seen the consequences of using it. Her visions, her psychic glimpses of the future, had shown her the destruction that awaited them if the Valthar or her family unleashed its full potential. And now, it was up to them to stop it. "Then we'll do what we've always done," Ardin said, his voice steady. "We fight." As the ship entered the atmosphere of the capital planet, the sprawling cityscape came into view. The capital was a fortress, its towering spires reaching toward the sky, casting long shadows over the ground. The entire city seemed to hum with a sense of power, a quiet reminder of the strength that lay beneath its surface. This was where Hyra's family ruled, where they held the galaxy in their grasp. And this was where it would all end. The ship descended through the atmosphere, the city growing larger with every passing second. They couldn't afford to be seen, not yet. They had to get close, infiltrate the heart of the Empire, and destroy the Void Gate before it was too late. Ardin's hand tightened on the controls as he guided the ship toward a hidden docking bay, far from the watchful eyes of the Empire. Hyra sat next to him, her mind already focused on the task ahead. The closer they got, the more determined she became. This was her fight, her chance to break free from the chains that had bound her for so long, and Ardin was right there with her every step of the way. As the ship landed with a soft thud, the airlock opened, and the two of them stepped out onto the cold, metallic floor of the docking bay. The area was deserted, a stark contrast to the bustling streets above, but they couldn't waste time. There was no telling how much longer they had before the Valthar, or Hyra's family, realized what they were up to. Hyra turned to Ardin, her expression set. "We need to move quickly. The Void Gate is hidden in the central tower. My family will have guards everywhere. They'll be expecting us." Ardin grinned. "You know I've never been good at following rules." Hyra didn't smile back, but there was something in her eyes, something almost like respect. "We'll need to stay low. The more attention we draw, the harder it will be to get to the Void Gate." Together they moved quickly through the corridors of the capital, staying to the shadows, avoiding patrols and using every ounce of their cunning to stay undetected. Hyra's psychic abilities were still unstable, but she was able to use them to guide them, sensing the positions of guards before they could be seen. Ardin, for his part, was sharp, always on the lookout for potential threats, his instincts kicking in as they moved deeper into the heart of the city. The journey wasn't easy. There were close calls, moments when it seemed like they would be caught. But with each passing moment, they grew closer to their goal. And as they reached the central tower, the air around them seemed to hum with an ominous energy. This was it. The Void Gate was just ahead, and with it, the fate of the galaxy. Inside the central tower, the final confrontation awaited them. They reached the chamber where the Void Gate was kept, a massive, ancient structure that seemed to pulse with power. The air around it crackled with energy, as though the gate itself were alive. It was more than just a doorway. It was a conduit, a bridge between worlds, between realities. Hyra stood before it, her eyes locked on the gate. "This is where it all ends," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "This is where I make my choice." Ardin watched her, understanding the weight of what she was about to do. The Void Gate was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of everything that had been forced upon her. Her family's legacy, the power they had built, all of it rested on this moment. And now she had the chance to end it, to stop the cycle of oppression and manipulation that had controlled her life for so long. You don't have to do this alone, Ardin said, stepping closer to her. We're in this together. Hira nodded, her gaze never leaving the void gate. I know, and I will destroy it. For the galaxy. For everyone who's ever been oppressed by my family's empire. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the surface of the gate, and the room shuddered as energy crackled through the air. Ardin felt a chill run down his spine as the gate began to react, its power building, its energy surging. Just as Hira was about to unleash her full power, the doors to the chamber slammed open, and Hira's father, the patriarch of her family, stepped into the room. You think you can destroy everything I've built? His voice boomed, filled with fury. You are my daughter, Hira. You cannot escape your destiny. Hira's eyes narrowed. My destiny is mine to choose, father, not yours. The confrontation was inevitable. The final battle was about to begin. The galaxy was watching, though they didn't know it yet. Hira and Ardin's fight for freedom would shape the future of the stars, deciding whether the chains of power would remain or if they would finally be broken. The war had begun, and no one would walk away from it unchanged. The tension in the chamber was palpable. Hira stood face to face with her father, the patriarch of her family, the very man who had shaped her life with his cold ambitions. Behind him, the void gate hummed with a dangerous energy, its power threatening to break free from the restraints that had held it for centuries. The room seemed to pulse with a dark, foreboding presence, and Hira felt the weight of her family's expectations pressing down on her. Her father's eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto her. You are my blood, Hira. You were born to lead this empire. You were born to wield the power of the void gate. You can't just throw it all away. Hira's gaze hardened. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing a future where we are not ruled by fear, where we are not slaves to power. I won't let you use the void gate to control the galaxy any longer. Her father's lips curled into a thin smile, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You think you can stop me? You think you can stop this empire? You are nothing without us, Hira. You are nothing without your bloodline. Ardin, standing slightly behind Hira, could feel the tension building. This was it. This was the moment where everything would either change or be destroyed. He stepped forward, his voice steady, yet carrying the weight of a man who had seen too much in his life to back down now. She's not nothing, Ardin said, his words cutting through the charged air. She's everything, and so are the millions of people you've crushed under your empire's boot. Hira isn't just your daughter, she's the future, and she's going to be the one who decides what that future looks like. Her father's expression faltered for a moment, his grip tightening on the hilt of the blade at his side. But he quickly regained control, his voice rising with authority. You think the galaxy is ready for such a change? You think you can take down an empire that has stood for centuries? It will not be that easy, Hira. Hira's hand moved to the stone of the void gate once more, her fingers tracing the ancient symbols etched into its surface. She could feel its power now, alive and waiting. But it was also unstable. She could sense the chaos it was capable of unleashing, the destruction that could follow if it wasn't controlled. She had seen the future, the devastation that would come if her father or the Valthar used the void gate. It was a fate that could not be allowed to unfold. I don't need to take down your empire, Hira said, her voice cold but resolute. I just need to stop the void gate, and I need to do it now. Her father's eyes blazed with fury. He stepped forward, his hand outstretched, and the ground beneath them trembled. You will not defy me, Hira. I will destroy you if I have to. You will stay in your place, and the power of this gate will remain mine. Hira's psychic energy flared to life, the room around them beginning to warp as the force of her abilities collided with the power of the void gate. It was a battle of wills, her father's unyielding desire for control versus her own will to forge a new future. The air crackled with tension as both sides pushed against each other, a storm of psychic energy and raw power building to a boiling point. Ardin felt the intensity of it, the way the very atmosphere seemed to warp and bend with the force of their struggle. He knew Hira was fighting not just for the galaxy, but for herself. She was fighting for her right to choose her destiny, for her right to be free of the chains her family had placed around her. Without warning, Hyra's psychic energy surged. The void gate pulsed in response, its power amplifying, growing uncontrollable. Her father staggered back, momentarily overwhelmed by the raw force of her abilities. He glared at her, his face twisted with rage. "You fool," he spat. "You have no idea what you're doing. You will destroy us all." Hyra's eyes burned with determination. "No, father. I'm saving us all." With one final burst of psychic force, Hyra reached out, her hands glowing with energy as she connected with the void gate. She focused all of her power into it, fighting to contain the eruption of energy that was threatening to escape. The entire room seemed to vibrate as the void gate responded, its dark power trying to break free from her grip. But Hyra held firm. She wasn't going to let it consume them. She wasn't going to let her father's ambitions destroy everything. This was her choice, her moment to shape the future. And with that decision came the release of a force so powerful, it shook the very foundations of the capital. The void gate exploded in a burst of blinding light. When the light faded, the chamber was silent, the air thick with the remnants of the psychic storm that had just unfolded. Ardin slowly stood, blinking against the haze that filled the room. He looked around, half expecting to see the capital in ruins, the walls cracked and crumbling from the force of the explosion. But to his surprise, the room was intact. The void gate had been destroyed, but it was no longer just a physical structure. It was something more. Hyra stood at the center of the room, breathing heavily, her face pale but resolute. Her father lay on the ground, his body twitching as if still caught in the remnants of the psychic shockwave. The battle was over, but the cost had been high. Her father groaned, pushing himself up weakly, his eyes filled with disbelief. "What have you done?" Hyra stood tall, her voice steady and unwavering. "I've freed the galaxy from your tyranny. I've freed myself. And I've made sure that no one will ever control the void gate again." Her father's eyes widened in shock. He took a step toward her, but his legs gave way, and he collapsed to the floor. For the first time in his life, he was powerless. The empire he had spent so many years building was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Ardin stepped forward, his eyes locked on Hyra's father. "You lost," he said simply, "and the galaxy is better for it." Hyra turned away from her father, her gaze shifting toward the horizon beyond the chamber. She had done it. She had destroyed the void gate, ended the stranglehold her family had on the galaxy, and freed herself from the chains that had bound her for so long. It wasn't just a victory for her, it was a victory for everyone who had ever been oppressed by the empires of the stars. But as she looked out into the future, she knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy was in ruins, but it was free. And now it was up to her and Ardin to rebuild, to create something new. Ardin walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "What now?" Hyra looked up at him, her expression softening. "Now we rebuild. Together." The galaxy was changing, and Hyra was ready to lead the way. She had made the hard choices, had defied her bloodline and the destiny that had been forced upon her. Now with Ardin by her side, she would build a new future, one where freedom reigned and power no longer came at the cost of oppression. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, but for the first time, Hyra knew that the galaxy's fate was truly in her hands. The stars above, once distant and cold, now felt like companions in their shared silence. The war was over, or at least the battle had been won. The fate of the galaxy rested not on ancient power, nor the cold grasp of empires, but on the shoulders of those willing to forge a future from the ashes of what had been. Hera stood at the edge of the ruined capital city, looking out at the sprawling world beneath her. The city was still intact, though its grand structures had been damaged, some irreparably. A part of her felt that loss, the weight of the destruction, but the other part of her knew that this was a necessary sacrifice. It was a breaking of the old world to make way for the new. Behind her, Ardin stood, leaning against the crumbled edge of a tower. His expression was unreadable, but there was a glimmer in his eyes that spoke volumes. The weight of the victory hadn't yet fully hit them both, and maybe it never would. There were no celebrations, no banners, no fireworks, just the quiet aftermath of a battle won not against a single enemy, but against the very structure that had kept the galaxy in chains for so long. "It's done," Hira said softly, turning to face him. The words felt strange on her tongue. She had spent so much of her life running from this moment, running from her destiny, only to find herself embracing it in the end. But she wasn't the person she had once been. She had fought, struggled, and bled for this freedom. "Yeah," Ardin said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "But now what? We don't exactly have a blueprint for this kind of thing." Hira smiled, a real smile this time. "I think we make our own blueprint." She stepped forward, her eyes filled with determination. "We don't know exactly what comes next, but we know what we don't want. We don't want to rule. We don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. We have the chance to create something different, something better." Ardin nodded, his expression softening. He had never been one to think about things like destiny or the future of galaxies, but with Hira beside him, he couldn't help but believe in the possibility of change. They had seen the worst of the galaxy, the cruelty, the corruption, and yet they were still here, alive, together, standing in the ruins of a fallen empire. That had to mean something. "You know," Ardin said, pushing off from the wall, "I've never been good at all this changing the world stuff, but maybe, just maybe, we can make a start. You and me." Hira looked at him, a quiet understanding passing between them. The journey they had taken, the battles they had fought, had brought them closer. They were no longer just survivors. They were architects of a new future. "Together," she agreed, the days following the destruction of the Void Gate were filled with uncertainty. The Empire's remnants were in disarray, their leaders scattered, their power fractured. Hira's family, now powerless, was left to face the consequences of their actions. But that wasn't what consumed Hira's thoughts. What mattered now was rebuilding, not with the power of the Void Gate, but with the strength of the people who had long been oppressed. The new government took shape quickly, but it wasn't built on the same old structures of power. Hira and Ardin worked together to create a coalition, a representative body that included voices from every corner of the galaxy, worlds that had never been heard before, people who had always been ignored. It was messy, it was difficult, but it was real, and it was theirs. They knew it wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding after centuries of tyranny would take time, and there would be resistance. There always was. But for the first time in her life, Hira felt the weight of her legacy shift from something oppressive to something liberating. The power her family had once held was gone, but her influence, her ability to inspire, remained. The work wasn't glamorous. There were no grand speeches or royal decrees. There were long meetings, compromises, and countless hours spent with diplomats, farmers, miners, and soldiers, people who had lived and suffered through the reign of her family, people who now had a say in their future. Together, they began to heal the fractures of the galaxy. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of negotiations, Hira and Ardin found themselves on the balcony of a new government building in the capital. The skyline was quiet, the glow of the city lights casting a soft glow over the ruins of the old palace. It was a strange mix of old and new, of what had been and what was yet to come. Hira leaned on the railing, looking out at the view. "I never thought I'd be here," she said softly. "Not like this. Not in control of my own future." Ardin joined her, leaning against the railing as well. "You never really were you? In control, I mean. But now you get to decide what happens next. We both do." Hira turned to him, her gaze steady. "We do." The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two people who had found their place in a world that was still figuring out what it wanted to be. They had destroyed the Void Gate, but in doing so, they had opened the door to something far great months past, and the galaxy slowly began to rebuild. The old power structures crumbled, but new ones were born, not from the top down, but from the ground up. Leaders were chosen for their merit, not their bloodline. Planets that had been subjugated for centuries began to find their voices again. Hira and Ardin traveled from world to world, working with local governments, helping them find their footing in this new galaxy. There were setbacks, of course, but each step forward was a victory. One day, as they stood in a meeting hall on a world far from the capital, a representative from a newly freed colony spoke up, his voice full of hope. "Thank you," he said, his eyes shining with sincerity, "for giving us the chance to decide our own future." Hyra smiled, a weight lifting from her shoulders. "It's not just us. It's all of you. The future belongs to everyone, not just a few." Ardin stood next to her, his arms folded across his chest. "But someone had to start it, and I'm glad it was us." As the years passed, the galaxy didn't become perfect. There was no utopia, no world where all problems were solved. But there was hope. There was a chance, a real one, for a better future. Hyra and Ardin continued their work, traveling, helping to mediate conflicts, pushing for fairness, and always questioning the old ways of doing things. They had broken the chains of the past, but the true work of creating something new would take lifetimes. And that was okay, because together they had proven that the galaxy could be changed. And with every step they took, the stars above seemed to shine just a little bit brighter. As they stood on the balcony one final time, watching the lights of the capital city spread across the horizon, Hyra took Ardin's hand. "We did it," she said softly, her voice full of a quiet, peaceful satisfaction. Ardin squeezed her hand. "No, we're just getting started." And as the sun set on the horizon, the galaxy seemed to take a deep breath, ready to begin again. As the years passed and the galaxy began to rebuild, Hyra and Ardin found themselves navigating the delicate balance of governance, peace, and the lingering shadows of their past. The people had spoken, the empire had crumbled, but the scars of tyranny, like the stars themselves, were infinite. Some wounds, no matter how much time passed, could not be healed entirely. Hyra stood at the front of a meeting room, surrounded by representatives from planets that had long been oppressed by her family's rule. They were no longer just voices of the galaxy, they were its future. Their faces were a mix of pride, skepticism, and hope, a far cry from the cold faces of the elite that once ruled from their ivory towers. Hyra, one of the representatives, spoke up, a woman from a world on the outer rim. "The people want more than just a new government. They want a future where they can rebuild their homes without fear of oppression, but there's something still holding them back." Hyra paused, looking around the room at the faces of those who had once been voiceless. Their hopes were palpable, and she understood their frustration. She had been in their shoes once, lost, trapped in a future her family had designed for her. She could sense it in their eyes. Uncertainty, fear of the unknown. "I know what you're asking for," Hyra replied, her voice steady but resolute. "The galaxy is fractured, trust is broken, but we've already taken the first step by rebuilding something different. A government for the people, by the people, not one where a single family or faction decides the fate of entire worlds." One of the men, a grizzled representative from a planet that had long resisted her family's rule, crossed his arms. "That's all well and good, but what if the old ways come back? There are whispers, rumors of factions gathering, old loyalists planning to take control again." Ardin, who had been silently observing from the back of the room, finally spoke up. "The old ways will never truly disappear. Power has a funny way of rising from the ashes. But we have something they don't: unity. We've started to rebuild this galaxy on our own terms. No more empires, no more dynasties. Just people, working together." Hyra nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The galaxy was healing, but there were still deep divides. She understood the need for change, real change, but that didn't mean everyone would welcome it. "We can't change everything overnight," she said, her eyes sweeping over the room. "But what we can do is ensure that the people, your people, have a voice. That's why we're here today, to create something that lasts, a galaxy that belongs to everyone, not just the few." The room was silent for a moment. The gravity of her words seemed to sink in. The change that Hyra had fought for, the one she had risked everything for, was not just a political system. It was a new way of life. And for all the progress, it would take years, maybe decades, for the scars of the past to truly heal. But in this room, in this moment, she could feel the weight of the galaxy shifting. They had a chance. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a utopia. But it was theirs, and that meant something. As Hira and Ardin walked through the halls of the newly established government building, they couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. The cold walls of the old regime were gone, replaced by structures that were a blend of the old and new. A symbol of hope, but also of the work yet to be done. Ardin glanced at her, his voice low. "Do you ever think about what comes next? What will we be remembered for?" Hira considered the question for a long moment. She had never been someone who craved fame or recognition. Her journey had never been about legacy. It had been about survival, freedom, and a better future for those who had been silenced. But now, as they stood together, with the galaxy in the palm of their hands, the weight of what they had accomplished couldn't be ignored. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted, "but I don't think I'll be remembered for the things I've done. I think the galaxy will remember the people, the ones who stood up, the ones who fought, the ones who believed in something different." Ardin smiled, a rare, genuine smile that was far less cynical than the one he wore when they first met. "Maybe, but I think they'll remember the two of us too, the ones who had a chance to change everything and didn't let it slip away." Hira smiled, but her expression softened. "The galaxy is changing, but we're not done yet. There will always be those who want to go back to the old ways, to take what we've built and twist it into something new. We'll have to stay vigilant." Ardin nodded. "We'll be ready." Months passed, and the challenges continued. There were still remnants of old loyalists, shadow factions, and those who craved power, even if it meant subjugating others. But Hira and Ardin remained steadfast. They traveled the galaxy, spreading their message of unity, rebuilding planets that had been ravaged by the old regime, and ensuring that no single group could seize control again. It wasn't easy. It was exhausting. And yet every step they took made the galaxy a little more stable, a little more united. The fear that once permeated the air had begun to lift, and in its place, a cautious optimism was born. One day, while visiting a small, war-torn planet on the outer rim, Hira was greeted by a group of young rebels who had once fought against her family's empire. They now served as part of the new government, and their faces were filled with hope. "Hira," one of the young leaders said, "we never thought we'd see a day like this. You're not just a leader. You're proof that we can change things, that there's hope, even after everything we've been through." Hira's heart swelled with pride, but she knew this was only a small part of the larger picture. "The hope is in you," she said, "in all of us. We'll rebuild this galaxy together, one world at a time." Years later, standing before the newly formed Council of Planets, a truly representative body that spanned the entire galaxy, Hira and Ardin looked out at the gathered leaders. The capital was no longer just a symbol of power. It was now a beacon of a new hope. The council was diverse, a reflection of the galaxy's many worlds and peoples. And as Hira stepped forward to speak, she knew that this was only the beginning. "This is not my victory," she said, her voice strong and clear. "This is ours, the victory of everyone who believed that a better future was possible. This galaxy is no longer a place ruled by the few, but by the many, by each of us." Ardin stood beside her, watching as the representatives from all corners of the galaxy stood in applause. The sounds of their clapping echoed throughout the hall, but it wasn't just for them. It was for a new beginning. Hira and Ardin walked away from the stage, their heads held high, knowing that their journey was far from over. But as they looked out at the stars, they could see something they hadn't seen in a long time: the possibility of peace. A new era had begun, and this time, it was one they could shape together. As the years drifted into a peaceful rhythm, the galaxy's wounds began to show their scars, even under the surface of new hope. For all the strides Hira and Ardin had made in reforming the galaxy, the process of rebuilding wasn't linear, nor was it free from resistance. The remnants of the old regime still lurked in the shadows, and there were always those who longed for the stability of the past, no matter how tyrannical it had been. Hira found herself in the middle of the most difficult part of their mission, trying to make sure the ideals they fought for didn't become just another set of empty promises. The galaxy needed to be united, not just in government, but in spirit. Unity was something she knew could only be forged through trust, and trust was a fragile thing. Ardin had been her rock through it all. Where her doubts sometimes clouded her judgment, he always reminded her why they were doing this. His cynicism, which had once been the hallmark of his survival, now served as a much-needed counterbalance to her more idealistic ambitions. Together they pushed forward, even as new challenges arose, more insidious than the ones they had already faced. One day after a long diplomatic meeting, Hera and Ardin found themselves walking through the ruins of the old palace. The walls were still scarred from the battle to tear down the empire. Where once her father's portrait had hung high above the throne room, there was now only a blank space, its absence a testament to everything that had been left behind. "Do you ever wonder if we're making the right decisions?" Hera asked, her voice soft, almost lost against the winds that howled through the broken windows. Ardin paused for a moment, looking out at the landscape, the city that was still struggling to find its place amidst the old and the new. "I don't know if we'll ever truly know if we made the right choice. We only know that we made a choice, and we stick with it. That's what matters." Hera nodded, though a part of her still wondered if this journey was the right path. The galaxy had its growing pains, and while they had made monumental changes, there were still so many conflicts left unresolved. Former members of the old military regime were still loyal to the idea of empire, and there were pockets of rebellion, insurgencies in remote sectors, trying to destabilize the work they'd already begun. "What if we're creating something just as fragile as what came before?" she murmured, thinking of the shadow factions who were always just a step behind them, seeking to divide the galaxy once more. Ardin turned to face her, his expression somber but unwavering. "Then we'll rebuild again, and again. We won't let those who want to return to the past win. But the only way to do that is to keep moving forward." Hera took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what they had started. She had spent her life running from her legacy, from the expectations placed on her. And now she was forging something new, but the weight of history was never far behind. It wasn't long before their first real challenge in this new phase of their work came to them. A rebellion had broken out on a remote planet in the Outer Rim. The factions involved weren't large, but they had gained enough traction to disrupt the fragile peace that had been established. Some said it was about freedom, others claimed it was about revenge against the old power structures that had been overthrown. But to Hera and Ardin, it was clear. The old ways were still too deeply rooted in some corners of the galaxy. The rebellion leaders wanted to hold on to what little power they had, a dangerous remnant of the old empire. Hera and Ardin knew that if they didn't stop it now, it could spiral out of control. But they also understood that force alone wouldn't solve this. They needed to show the people that their future was in their hands, not in the hands of power, hungry leaders who wanted to turn back time. They traveled to the planet, a harsh world on the fringe of the galaxy where the rebellion was gathering. The barren landscape stretched for miles, dotted with the crumbling remnants of old imperial facilities. "We're going to need more than just a show of force," Hera said as they made their way through the wind-blown dust. "We need to show them why this galaxy is worth fighting for. Not just because it's free, but because it's theirs." Ardin, who had always been skeptical of idealism, gave her a sidelong glance. "You think that's enough? You think words will fix a war that's been brewing for so long?" Hera's response was unwavering. "It's not just about words. It's about showing them they have power, that they can have a say in the galaxy's future. If we can unite them around that, maybe we can stop this rebellion before it spreads." When they arrived at the rebel camp, they were met with distrust and resistance. The planet's leader, a man named Kalen, had long been part of the fringe group fighting against Hera's family. For him, the fall of the empire had only left a void to be filled, and he believed that his way was the only path forward. "You think you can fix this, Hera?" Kalen asked, his tone full of contempt. "The empire is gone, but the systems you've put in place are still corrupt. They're still the same systems that ruined our lives." Hera met his gaze, her expression calm but firm. "The systems aren't perfect. We're rebuilding. But no one can do this alone. Not you, not me. The galaxy has to heal together, or it won't heal at all." Kalen didn't respond right away, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Ardin stepped forward, his voice low and measured. "If you keep fighting the way you are, you'll destroy everything we've built. You'll burn down what was left of the old empire, but you'll just create another version of it, one where you're the ruler. Is that what you want?" There was a long silence before Kalen spoke again, his voice quieter. What do you want me to do, Hyra? Lay down my arms? Pretend like everything's going to be okay? No, Hyra replied, stepping closer. I want you to fight for something real. Fight for the future, not for the past. The galaxy is ready for something different, but we need you to help us show them that. The days that followed were filled with tense negotiations. Kalen's faction, while stubborn, was not immune to reason. Slowly they began to see the cracks in their own ideology. The old ways were too ingrained in their hearts, but with time they began to understand Hyra's vision. This was not about dismantling everything they had fought for. It was about rebuilding something more stable, more inclusive. Eventually they agreed to a ceasefire, and a new agreement was put into place, a commitment to peace and cooperation with the new government. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and there were still holdouts who believed in fighting, but it was a start. As they left the planet, Hyra and Ardin stood together on the ship's observation deck, looking out at the stars. Hyra felt a deep sense of exhaustion, but there was also something else. Hope. Real, hard, earned hope. This is just the beginning, isn't it? Ardin said, his voice a little softer than usual. Hyra nodded. Yes, there will always be those who fight against change, but I believe we're on the right path. Ardin smiled, his usual cynicism tempered by something else, something she had never seen in him before. Conviction. We'll keep fighting then, he said, for the people, for the future. Together they watched the stars ahead, knowing that the galaxy they had fought for was finally beginning to take shape, and that their work, no matter how difficult or uncertain, was worth every sacrifice. The galaxy had begun to show signs of life again, but peace, as Hyra and Ardin soon learned, was a delicate thing. The rebellion on the fringe planet had been quelled, but that victory felt more like the calm before a storm. The new government was slowly gaining ground, but there were still deep fractures. Some systems had embraced the changes they had worked so hard to create, while others resisted with the stubbornness of those who had long enjoyed power and control. For Hyra, every success was tempered by the knowledge that this was not over. Their mission was far from complete. The scars of empire ran deep, and in some places, the old ideologies were as entrenched as ever. Ardin had been working behind the scenes, using his skills to gather intelligence on those who still held out hope for a return to the Empire's glory. Small cells of resistance fighters, rogue factions, and former Imperial officers still lingered in the shadows. They were the ghosts of the old regime, not yet ready to fade into history. The day came when they received word of a significant threat, a covert faction led by one of Hyra's own cousins, Kalen. He had always been a shadowy figure in the family's military network, and his ambitions were as dangerous as his cunning. Rumors had been swirling for weeks, but now there was concrete evidence that Kalen was planning to take control of several key systems. If he succeeded, it would set the galaxy back by decades. Hyra couldn't let that happen. They made their way to a small, fortified world near the Outer Rim, where Kalen's faction was suspected to be gathering. It was a planet on the edge of civilization, forgotten by most, a place where the old power could still fester and grow without the watchful eyes of the new government. I can't believe it's him, Hyra said, her voice strained as she scanned the data on her screen. Kalen was always ambitious, but I never thought he'd be this reckless. He knows the galaxy's fragile. He knows we can't afford another empire. Ardin leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Reckless or not, he's dangerous. People like him don't give up power easily. If he has the support of enough people, we're looking at a civil war. Hyra nodded grimly. Then we stop him before it gets that far. They landed in the heart of the planet's largest city, a crumbling industrial hub surrounded by dense forests and mountains. The planet's population was sparse, the infrastructure decaying, but it was still an important strategic point. Whoever controlled it had access to key trade routes and military outposts. For Kalen, it was a perfect base of operations. The air was thick with tension as Hyra and Ardin disembarked from their ship, joined by a small team of soldiers. They had to move quickly. Time was against them, and Kalen's forces had likely already begun making their move. Stay alert, Ardin warned, scanning the area as they moved through the abandoned city streets. The silence of the place was eerie, like a ghost town waiting to wake up. This place gives me the creeps. I know the feeling, Hira muttered, looking around. But we have to push forward. Every minute we waste gives Kalen more time to dig in. As they approached the main government building, Hira felt a familiar sense of dread settle in her chest. The last time she'd been in a place like this, it was to face her family. Now, it was to face someone who wanted to revive the very thing they had fought so hard to destroy. She couldn't let that happen again. They reached the building's entrance. The massive doors rusted from years of neglect. Hira's heart pounded as she entered, feeling the weight of the moment press down on her. The lobby was quiet, too quiet, but as they moved deeper into the building, they encountered their first resistance, a squad of mercenaries loyal to Kalen, armed and ready to fight. Ardin reacted instantly, his hand going to his blaster. He had never been one to hesitate in the face of danger. Hira followed suit, using her psychic abilities to destabilize the mercenaries' movements, pushing them back with force. The battle was brief but intense, and when it was over, the air was thick with the smell of blaster fire and sweat. "That wasn't too bad," Ardin said, wiping the sweat from his brow. Hydra looked around, her eyes narrowing. "It's never that easy. They'll know we're here now. We need to move fast." The group continued deeper into the building, every step taking them closer to Kalen's command center. Hira's mind raced, running through every possibility. She knew Kalen was smart, and he wouldn't be caught off guard. The closer they got, the more she sensed his presence, his influence on this planet. He wasn't just hiding in the shadows, he was manipulating them. They finally reached the command room, and the door slid open to reveal Kalen, standing at the center of a large table, surrounded by screens and holographic projections of various planetary systems. "Well, Welmer," he said, turning to face them. "Hira, Ardin, I've been expecting you." For a moment, the room was silent. Hira stood tall, her eyes fixed on Kalen, the blood of her family running through both of them. Yet there was nothing alike in their paths. He was power, hungry, a man who saw only conquest and control. She had seen that path once before. She knew where it led. "You're making a mistake, Kalen," Hira said, her voice unwavering. "You're not building a future. You're building a prison. I'm not going to let you drag this galaxy back into the darkness." Kalen's eyes flickered with amusement, but underneath it, there was something darker, something colder. "You always did have idealistic dreams, Hira, but you're naive if you think that peace will last. Chaos is the natural state of the galaxy, and I'm the one who will bring order, the kind of order your family could never provide." Ardin stepped forward, his tone mocking. "Order, or just control? You want to play God with the galaxy, but you're too blind to see that the people will never follow someone like you." Kalen's smile faltered, and in that moment, the air grew heavier. He was dangerously close to losing his temper, and Hira knew it. He had underestimated her, thinking that she would just stand there and let him ramble on about his grand plan. "I'm not like your father," Hira said quietly. "I won't let you destroy everything we've worked for." With a sudden movement, Kalen activated a hidden switch beneath the table, and the floor beneath them began to tremble. A large wall of reinforced steel shot up, separating them from the rest of the room. The walls began to hum with the energy of a containment field. "You'll never stop me, Hira," Kalen said, his voice now cold. "I've planned for this. You'll die here with nothing but the ashes of your ideals." The fight for the galaxy's future was reaching its final stages. Hira and Ardin had faced countless challenges, but this one felt different. It wasn't just a battle against a man, it was a battle for the very soul of the galaxy. Hira gritted her teeth, her hand reaching for her sidearm. "Then let's see who's truly ready to rule this galaxy." The room erupted into chaos as Kalen's forces stormed the area. But this time, Hira was ready. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the galaxy, for the future, for every person who had been oppressed by the empires of the past. And this time, she would win. The walls around Hira and Ardin seemed to pulse with a deep mechanical hum as Kalen's forces swarmed toward them, their footsteps echoing in the cold, sterile room. The containment field flickered to life, a barrier of energy cutting off their escape. Hira felt the weight of the moment, but there was no fear in her, only resolve. The old empire had nearly destroyed everything she cared about, but this time, she wasn't going to let it take root again. "Stay sharp," Ardin said, his voice low as he reached for his blaster. "This isn't over." Hyra nodded, her fingers twitching with psychic energy as she gathered herself. The containment field was powerful, but it wasn't impenetrable. They had fought their way through worse, and this time would be no different. She was done with waiting for the right moment. She was going to make it the right moment. The first wave of Kalen's soldiers entered the room, charging forward with blasters raised. Hyra's heart rate quickened, but she focused. She felt the power of the void gate within her, the energy she had stolen from its destruction coursing through her veins. Her psychic abilities were stronger than ever, but they were also unstable. She had to be careful. If she unleashed too much power, they could both be overwhelmed, and the containment field could destroy everything they'd worked for. But Ardin didn't wait for her to make a move. He fired first, his blaster shots sharp and precise. The soldiers fell back, their shields flickering as they returned fire. Ardin dodged, moving with fluid grace, his movements a dance of survival. Every time one of the enemy soldiers aimed at him, they were met with a well-placed shot. Hyra focused, extending her mind outward, sensing the soldiers' positions before they even entered her line of sight. She swept her hand through the air, and the closest soldiers were knocked off their feet, their weapons flying from their hands. But Kalen wasn't there to fight his own battles. From the shadows at the back of the room, he watched, his cold eyes calculating as he activated another series of mechanisms hidden in the walls. The ground trembled once again, and Hyra could feel the power build. It wasn't just the soldiers they had to worry about anymore. "Kalen!" Hyra shouted, her voice carrying across the room. "You can't win this. You can't bring back the Empire." He stepped into the light, his expression one of disdain. "I don't need to bring it back, Hyra. I'm going to build something stronger. I've already started. The galaxy needs order, and I'm the one who will give it to them." "You don't understand," Hyra replied, taking a step toward him. Her voice was steady, but beneath the surface, her mind was racing. She knew the stakes. "You're just recreating the same cycle. Power, oppression, war. You're not building order, you're building a prison." Kalen's eyes flashed and his lips curled into a sinister smile. "Order? Maybe, but first I'll burn this place down." Before Hyra could react, the floor shifted beneath their feet. Panels opened on the walls, releasing drones that hovered toward them, weapons at the ready. These were no ordinary drones. They were armed with high-powered lasers capable of disintegrating solid material. Hyra raised her hands, using her powers to deflect the initial barrage of fire. But it was too much. The drones moved too fast, and the energy blasts were too powerful to block with just a wave of her hand. She needed a plan. Fast. Ardin fired at the drones, but there were too many of them. Each shot he took seemed to push them back for only a moment before they regrouped. The room began to feel smaller as the drones closed in on them, and Kalen watched from a safe distance, his arms crossed, a smug expression on his face. "Do you really think you can stop this, Hyra?" he called out, his voice mocking. "You're just one person, one broken girl who thinks she can change everything. The galaxy is too vast for you. Too broken." Hyra gritted her teeth. He was right. The galaxy was vast, but she wasn't alone. With a final surge of psychic energy, Hyra pushed herself to the limit. Her powers flared in a blinding pulse that rippled through the room, crashing into the drones and causing them to explode midair. The shockwave reverberated through the walls, knocking Kalen back. He stumbled, surprised by the intensity of her attack. Ardin took his chance. He moved swiftly, his blaster at the ready, and took down the remaining drones with well-placed shots. But the room wasn't silent. Kalen was still standing, and the danger wasn't over yet. "Impressive," Kalen said, wiping a smear of blood from his lip. His eyes were cold, but there was something darker behind them now, something desperate. "But it's not enough. It'll never be enough." Kalen raised his hand, and suddenly the room flickered with an eerie blue glow. The walls began to shift again, and a massive armored mech, designed for one purpose, to crush anything in its path, emerged from the hidden recesses of the building. It was a relic of the old empire, designed with devastating power. "I'll show you what true power looks like," Kalen said, his voice trembling with rage. Hyra's heart sank as the mech charged forward, its heavy footsteps shaking the room. The walls rattled under the force of its movements, and the air grew thick with tension. This was the weapon that could crush them both. "Ardin," Hyra said through gritted teeth. "We need to stop it." "I've got it," Ardin said, already moving toward the mech, his blaster raised. He fired at the mech's joints, but the shots were ineffective against its heavy armor. Hyra could feel the panic rising in her chest. They couldn't afford to waste time. If they didn't act quickly, this would be the end. "Together," Hyra said, her voice determined. "We have to focus now." With a deep breath, she reached out, extending her psychic energy as far as it could go, trying to break through the mech's defense systems. She could feel its power, its weight, and its sheer strength pressing against her mind. It was a battle of wills, hers against the machine. But she wasn't alone. Ardin reached her side, his eyes locked on the mech. With his sharp aim, he disabled one of the mech's arms, and Hyra pushed further, breaking through its systems. With a final explosive burst of psychic energy, the mech's control system failed. The massive machine shuddered and fell, crashing to the ground in a heap of sparks and twisted metal. Kalen's face twisted in disbelief. "Impossible!" Hyra turned to him, her eyes cold. "Nothing is impossible when you're willing to fight for what's right." In the silence that followed, Hyra and Ardin stood side by side, their breathing heavy, the tension still crackling in the air. Kalen was on his knees, his empire crumbling before him. "You've lost, Kalen," Hyra said softly. "This was never your galaxy to rule." Kalen's eyes flickered with a flash of something, perhaps anger, perhaps realization, but whatever it was fleeting. In the end, he was just another would-be tyrant brought down by the very ideals he sought to destroy. "You'll regret this," Kalen spat, but his words lacked conviction. His power was gone, and with it, his control. Hyra stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "I don't think I will." With Kalen's defeat, the galaxy's future shifted once more. The forces that had once been so strongly divided began to unite. The rebellion that had lingered on the fringes of Hyra's fight now had no place to hide. The new government was stronger, more united, and Hyra and Ardin's journey had brought them one step closer to their vision, a galaxy built not on the power of a single family, but on the collective strength of its people. As they left the remnants of Kalen's base behind, Hyra couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. The road ahead would never be easy, but for the first time in a long while, she could see a future worth fighting for. The silence that followed the destruction of Kalen's forces felt like the calm after a storm. The dust settled, the power of the old empire lay in ruins, and Hyra and Ardin stood together at the heart of a galaxy they had both fought so hard to reshape. The victory over Kalen was just the latest chapter in a saga that had begun long before they'd ever met. But this time, the future seemed different, brighter even. They stood on the observation deck of their ship, looking out into the vast expanse of space. The stars, once cold and distant, now felt like beacons of possibility. Hyra gazed at the endless expanse before her, the burden of leadership heavy, but no longer unbearable. The galaxy was no longer under the thumb of an empire. It was in the hands of those who would fight for it, who would ensure that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. "Do you ever wonder if we've done enough?" Hyra asked, her voice quiet, but filled with the weight of a question she had been carrying for some time. Ardin turned his gaze from the stars, offering her a small but knowing smile. "We've done everything we could, and maybe more than anyone expected. But the real work, now that's just beginning." Hyra turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "You mean the galaxy's not fixed just because Kalen's gone?" Ardin chuckled, the sound low but warm. "Not by a long shot. This was only the first step. The real fight's always about making sure the changes stick. We've got to make sure the new government doesn't fall into the same traps as the old one. We've seen how easily power can corrupt, how quickly the good intentions of reformers can be twisted." Hyra nodded, her gaze returning to the stars. "You're right. I spent my whole life running from my family's legacy. Now I have to make sure that legacy doesn't repeat itself, even if it's in a different form. But you won't do it alone," Ardin said firmly, stepping up beside her. We'll both see it through. The galaxy's a big place, and it's got a long way to go. But we've got something different now, a real chance to build something, a chance to make it last. As the days passed, Hira and Ardin moved forward with their plan to solidify the new galaxy, meeting with leaders from the farthest reaches of the galaxy, each one representing a piece of a larger puzzle. Every system was different, with its own unique history, culture, and values. It was no simple task to create a unified government from so many diverse worlds, but they had a vision, one that was not built on power or conquest, but on mutual respect, cooperation, and justice. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, arguments, and moments of doubt, but Hira and Ardin worked tirelessly, building coalitions, negotiating compromises, and, most importantly, listening. They were creating a galaxy where no one would ever have to live under the shadow of an empire again. One evening after a particularly intense round of negotiations, Ardin leaned back in his chair, his eyes glancing toward Hira. She was staring out at the window, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the stars outside. You know, when we first met, Ardin began, I never thought we'd end up here. I thought I was just going to walk away from all this. Get out of the way, let the real leaders do their thing. But now I don't know what I'd do without it. Hira smiled without turning to him. You're one of the real leaders now, Ardin. Whether you like it or not. He chuckled. Yeah, I know. Doesn't exactly fit with my original plan of staying under the radar. You were always going to be part of this, she said, her voice soft but steady. You've been my partner through all of this. You've fought for the same things I have. You've fought for this galaxy, even when it seemed like the odds were stacked against us. Ardin stood up, moving to join her by the window. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze lingering on the stars. You know, I used to think the galaxy was just one big mess. No one could fix it. But now I think maybe we're a mess. Maybe we're the ones who are supposed to make it right. Hira turned to him then, her expression thoughtful. Maybe we are, but we're not doing it alone. We've got a whole galaxy full of people who want something different. We just need to make sure they have the power to make it happen. Weeks passed into months and the work continued. Hira and Ardin traveled to planet after planet, hearing the stories of those who had suffered under the old regime and those who had never known anything else. They listened and they learned. They built the new government slowly, making sure it was transparent, accountable, and truly representative of the people. There were those who tried to resist the changes. Old loyalties, old powers still clung to the shadows, waiting for the moment when they could strike. But Hira was prepared. She knew the signs. And with Ardin by her side, she knew they could face whatever came next. They had learned from the past, and they would not repeat it. On one particularly peaceful day, as they sat in the council chambers, Hira looked at Ardin and asked, What do you think our future holds? Do you think we'll ever truly be free of the ghosts of the past? Ardin leaned back in his chair, looking out the window at the stars once again. I don't know if anyone's ever completely free of their past, Hira, but I think we're building something that's worth fighting for. We've made it this far. Together, she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet determination. And that's how we'll make sure it lasts. It was then that the transmission came through, a distress signal from one of the outer colonies. The signal was weak, but it was clear enough to hear the message. Help! The factions are rising again. We can't hold out much longer. Hira and Ardin exchanged a quick look. The war might have ended, but the struggle for the future wasn't over. And once again, they had to act. Let's go, Ardin said, standing up. We're not done yet. Hira nodded, a fire in her eyes. No, we're just getting started. As they prepared to leave, Hira looked out at the galaxy before them. The vastness that had once seemed overwhelming now felt like a field of infinite possibility. The Empire was gone. The galaxy had been freed, not just from its chains, but from the idea that it was destined to be ruled by the powerful. It was now a galaxy for the people, a galaxy where they could all determine their fate. And as she and Ardin set out once more, to face whatever challenge awaited them, Hira knew one thing with certainty. The horizon was no longer just a distant dream, it was a future that was within their grasp. and they would fight to ensure it remained theirs.